My name is Anya Petrova. I am 31 years old, and for the last decade, I have believed that silence possesses its own distinct sound, a low, persistent hum that settles in the hollows of your bones. But today, standing in the sun-drenched entryway of my own home, that hum was shattered by the sharp, discordant sound of my mother's gasp. She had just walked into the sea-glass house, the cliffside retreat in Seacliff Point that she and my father believed they had rented for their 40th wedding anniversary, a grand family reunion to which I, of course, had not been invited. My father, Roman Volkov, stood frozen a few feet behind her, his hand still on the handle of his rolling suitcase. The look on his face, a dizzying kaleidoscope of confusion, shock, and dawning comprehension, was a photograph I would capture in my mind and keep forever. My mother, Natalia, let her pristine leather handbag slip from her fingers, its soft thud on the antique Persian rug echoing the collapse of her immaculate composure. The last time I had seen them, I was 21, walking away from their manicured San Francisco world with nothing but $500 and a vintage camera, while their silence told me I was no longer their daughter. I did not scream or raise my voice. The ocean, crashing on the rocks 100 feet below the house, made more than enough noise for all of us. I simply stood there, a ghost they had long ago exorcised, now inexplicably materialized as the owner of their exclusive holiday sanctuary. Before I tell you what happened in the moments that followed, I must take you back to the beginning, to the world I left behind. Growing up as the middle child in the Volkov family felt like living in a perfectly curated museum where I was the one exhibit that didn't quite fit. My father, a titan in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley venture capital, and my mother, a descendant of one of San Francisco's founding families, viewed life as a portfolio of strategic assets. Their children were their most prized investments, expected to yield significant returns in the form of prestige and legacy. My older brother, Nikolai, was their blue-chip stock. He followed the prescribed path with unnerving precision: Stanford, Harvard Law, and a swift descent to partnership at a powerhouse tech law firm. My younger sister, Sophia, was the beautiful, secure bond, marrying the heir to a software fortune before her diploma from Berkeley had even been framed, securing her position within the city's elite social strata with a flawless wedding and a home in Pacific Heights. And then there was me. My currency was not logic or social grace, but light. From the age of 8, when my grandfather gave me his old Kodak Brownie camera, I saw the world in frames. I was obsessed with the way the morning fog softened the hard lines of the city skyline, the intricate dance of shadows on our perfectly polished hardwood floors, the secret, weary kindness in the eyes of our housekeeper, Maria, when she thought no one was watching. "It's a lovely hobby, Anya," my mother would say, her tone gentle but firm as she'd straighten a picture frame I had tilted to catch a different reflection. "But it's not a foundation for a life." By the time I was 17, I had saved enough from summer jobs to buy my first serious DSLR. It became an extension of my body. I spent every spare moment in the darkroom I'd fashioned in a corner of our basement, the scent of developing chemicals a comforting perfume. My passion was a secret I guarded fiercely. "You need to focus on your future," my father would insist over dinners that felt more like board meetings. "A business degree from Stanford. You have a good mind for systems, for seeing how things connect." He was right, but only because I saw the world in terms of composition and f-stops, the beautiful, mathematical relationship between light, time, and focus. I compromised, as I always had. I enrolled in Stanford's prestigious business program, and they were placated. They never knew that I filled every available elective slot with art history and photography courses, my spirit living in the quiet, dusty halls of the art department while my body sat through lectures on microeconomics. For 4 years, I was two people: the dutiful daughter securing a sensible future, and the clandestine artist, feeding her soul in stolen hours. Graduation day arrived, a flawless Northern California afternoon. We were seated at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Napa, the sunlight glinting off crystal glasses, a celebration of my newly minted degree. I had a job offer from a top-tier consulting firm, a position my father had subtly helped arrange. I felt it was the one moment of leverage I might ever have. "I've decided to defer the job offer," I announced after the first course was cleared. "I'm going to pursue photography professionally. I've been accepted into a mentorship program with a renowned landscape photographer." The silence that fell over the table was as absolute as a closed shutter. My mother's smile froze, a perfect, brittle mask. My father stared at me, his expression one of profound disappointment, as if his most promising investment had just declared bankruptcy. "Don't be absurd," he finally said, his voice dangerously low. "We've already told everyone you're starting at Kenway in August. It is all arranged." "I'm not," I replied, my voice miraculously steady. "I've already told them I won't be accepting the position." The ensuing conversation was not a fight. Fights are messy, emotional. This was a clinical, calculated dissection of my aspirations. They spoke of financial instability, of the foolishness of trading a secure future for a bohemian fantasy. They painted a bleak picture of a life lived on the fringes, beneath the station I was born to occupy. "If you walk down this path," my father said, his voice devoid of all warmth, "you walk it alone. We will not fund your failure. You'll come to your senses," my mother added, a chillingly calm prophecy. "You always do." But this time, I didn't. 2 days later, I packed my life into my aging sedan. It wasn't much, some clothes, my cameras, and a box of photographs. My bank account, containing what was left of my graduation gift money, held $500. It was barely enough for a month's rent in the cheapest part of Oakland. Nikolai found me in my room, taping up the last box. "They'll come around," he said, leaning against the doorframe, though his eyes told a different story. Sophia was out with her fiancé. She didn't even call. The first 2 years were a crucible. I found a tiny room in a shared house in Oakland, the kind of place where you could hear your roommates breathing through the walls. I worked as a barista by day and a waitress by night. In the slivers of time in between, I shot. I photographed the raw, industrial beauty of the shipyards, the vibrant chaos of street festivals, the quiet dignity of faces in the early morning light. I was building a portfolio, and I was building a new identity, one photograph at a time. The silence from my family was absolute. My first Christmas away, I called their number. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I left a message. They never called back. I tried again on my birthday on their anniversary. Eventually, the silence became a wall I could no longer breach. Nikolai sent a perfunctory text on my first birthday away. By the second year, even that stopped. I saw on social media that Sophia had her first child, a daughter. No one called to tell me I was an aunt. I learned of my grandfather's death, the man who had given me my first camera, from his online obituary. My name was not listed among the surviving grandchildren. It was not just an absence, it was an active erasure. My break came not from a moment of brilliance, but from a moment of sheer luck. A well-known architectural photographer, Marcus Thorne, needed a last-minute assistant for a shoot in Sausalito. His regular assistant was sick. The pay was $100 for a 12-hour day. I took it without hesitation. I arrived an hour early, stayed 2 hours late, and anticipated his needs before he voiced them. As we packed up his gear in the pre-dawn quiet, he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "You have the hunger," he said. "It's a rare thing." Marcus wasn't a sentimental man, but he was a pragmatist. He saw my drive and my raw talent, and he recognized a good investment. He took me on, first as an assistant, then as a second shooter. I learned the business of art from him, how to negotiate contracts, manage demanding clients, and market a vision. "Weddings and portraits are fleeting," he told me once, reviewing my work. "But buildings have longevity. And the people who own them have deep pockets." He introduced me to a real estate agent friend who needed photos for a modest condo. I treated that small space like it was a feature for Architectural Digest, finding elegance in its simple lines and clean light. The agent was thrilled. She referred me to her colleagues. Within a year, I had carved out a niche in high-end real estate photography. 2 years after that, I landed my first major commission, a spectacular penthouse in the new Salesforce Tower. The owner, Genevieve Dubois, was present for the shoot. She was in her late 70s, a fiercely intelligent woman who had built a small, independent publishing house into a literary empire. She watched me work with a quiet, penetrating gaze. "You don't just take pictures of spaces," she said as I angled my tripod to capture the evening light on the cityscape. "You capture their soul." Genevieve became my champion. She hired me for all her properties and introduced me to her circle of equally discerning friends. I became the go-to photographer for a certain echelon of San Francisco society, my work known for its quiet, artistic sensibility. When Genevieve was diagnosed with a terminal illness, she asked me to undertake a final, personal project to document her favorite places. We traveled together to a rustic cabin in Montana, a chic apartment in Paris, and finally, to her most beloved sanctuary, a stunning, secluded house built of cedar and glass, perched on a cliff at Seacliff Point. "My children find this place too remote," she confided as we walked along the private beach below the house, the wind whipping our hair. "Too much quiet," they say. They don't know how to listen to it. Genevieve passed away 6 months later. I stood at the back of the cathedral during her memorial, an anonymous mourner among the city's elite. Her children, all successful adults in their own right, looked appropriately somber but distant. 3 weeks later, a call came from her lawyer. I assumed she had left me a piece of art, or perhaps one of her vintage cameras. Instead, the lawyer slid a thick file across his polished mahogany desk. "The property at Seacliff Point," he said gently. "Genevieve left it to you, along with a trust to cover taxes and maintenance for the next decade." I stared at the deed, the words blurring. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake." He handed me a sealed envelope. "She left you this as well." Genevieve's letter was written in her elegant, decisive script. "Anya, you see the beauty my family never could. This house needs someone who understands its spirit. Make it your home, but more than that, make it your foundation." I built my life by turning my passion into an enterprise. Now it is your turn. The Sea Glass House became my home and the headquarters for Aperture Arts. I converted the guest house into a state-of-the-art studio and office. My business flourished. I hired a small, dedicated team. My client list grew to include boutique hotel chains and renowned architects. My work was featured in design magazines I had once only dreamed of. I had built a life of quiet success, a life that was wholly mine. I had a small, close circle of friends, a business I was proud of, and a home that felt like an extension of my own soul. And yet, sometimes, in the dead of night, with only the sound of the ocean for company, I would pull out the one small box of old family photos I had kept. There we were, the 5 of us, smiling on a ski trip. My parents on their 25th anniversary, a perfect, polished couple. The success had healed the wounds of poverty and uncertainty, but it had not healed the original wound, the one left by the silence. I had proven them wrong, but in doing so, I had lost them completely. And some nights, that loss still felt like a physical ache in my chest. The Instagram post appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was from my sister, Sophia. I rarely looked at her feed, a meticulously curated gallery of her perfect life, but the location tag caught my eye, Seacliff Point. The photo showed my parents, arm in arm on a windswept beach, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "So excited for Mom and Dad's 40th anniversary celebration next month. A little family getaway to the coast." I zoomed in, my heart pounding. That wasn't just any beach. It was my beach. The secluded cove beneath my house. A quick, frantic search confirmed my suspicion. They had booked my home through a luxury rental agency that managed a portfolio of exclusive properties for owners who traveled frequently. The rentals were handled with complete anonymity. My first impulse was a tidal wave of panic. I called my property manager, a calm, efficient woman named Chloe. "We can cancel, of course," she said, after I vaguely explained the situation. "But they've paid in full. It's a non-refundable booking. To cancel now without a clear reason like property damage would be unusual. It could damage our reputation." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I could invent a reason. A sudden plumbing emergency, unnecessary repair. I could flee, book a job on the other side of the world, and let them have their reunion in blissful ignorance. But then, a few days later, my mother posted a rare update on her Facebook page. It was a photo of her and my father, perfectly posed in their living room, looking forward to a simple, quiet family gathering to celebrate 40 years. Nothing grand, just time with those who truly matter. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for 10 years, hardened into resolve. Simple? The rental fee for that week was $20,000. Those who truly matter. The message was as clear as it had been a decade ago. I would not cancel, and I would not run. This was my home, my life, my success, built not just in spite of them, but from the ashes of the life they had planned for me. For the first time, I would not be the one to disappear. The week before they were due to arrive, I prepared my home as if for a gallery opening. I made sure every detail was perfect. The security system, which included discrete cameras in the main living areas, had been installed when I first bought the place. I told myself it was for insurance purposes, but as I watched the live feed on the day of their arrival, I knew it was also about control. It was about seeing them in my world before they saw me. I watched them arrive, one by one. My father inspecting the craftsmanship of the hand-carved mantelpiece. My mother directing the placement of luggage as if orchestrating a military campaign. Nikolai, his wife, and their 2 children, a boy and a girl I had never met. Sophia, her husband, and their 3 children. Aunts, uncles, and cousins followed. I watched as they explored my home with a mixture of awe and entitlement. I watched my mother replace the wildflowers I had arranged with a more formal bouquet of lilies she had brought with her. The most painful moment came when Sophia began arranging framed family photos on the entryway console. Decades of Volkov history from which I had been meticulously excised. I saw her pick up a group photo from a long-ago family vacation, one where I stood on the end, beaming. I watched as she subtly shifted it behind a larger, more recent portrait of her own perfect family. My existence was not just forgotten, it was actively being concealed. That evening, I listened to their dinner conversation through the small speaker of my laptop, feeling like a ghost in my own machine. They talked of Nikolai's latest legal victory, Sophia's son's acceptance into an exclusive preschool, my parents' upcoming cruise to Greece. My name was a void. Then my cousin Lena, who had been a quiet, observant child of 10 when I left, spoke up. "I wonder what ever happened to Anya," she said into a lull in the conversation. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. "That's not an appropriate topic for the dinner table," Lena, my mother said, her voice sharp. "I was just curious," Lena insisted. "I always liked her. She took the best photos." "Your cousin made her choices," my father's voice boomed, closing the subject with an air of finality. "We have respected them." I switched off the feed, my hands shaking. Respected them? They had erased me. I walked out onto my deck, the cool night air a balm on my skin. I looked at the house, blazing with light and filled with the family that had cast me out. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I walk back into my own life. The next morning, I dressed with the same care I would for a major client presentation. A simple, beautifully tailored silk dress in a deep charcoal gray. Minimalist silver jewelry. My hair pulled back in a sleek, low ponytail. I was the embodiment of professional, understated success. I waited until I heard the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation from the main deck, where they had gathered for a catered lunch. Then I walked out of my studio, across the stone pathway, and through the open glass doors of the main house. My heels made a soft, deliberate click on the hardwood floors. One by one, heads turned. Conversations faltered. 12 pairs of eyes fixed on me, a collective portrait of disbelief. My mother was the first to recognize me. The crystal flute of mimosa in her hand tilted, spilling a pale orange line down the front of her white linen dress. My father half rose from his seat, his face a mask of confusion. "Anya?" Nikolai whispered, as if the name itself was a foreign word on his tongue. I offered a small, calm smile, the one I reserved for navigating difficult negotiations. "Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the house." Sophia found her voice first, her tone sharp with suspicion. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I live here," I said, the words dropping into the silence like stones into a still pond. "This is my home." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. Even the children seemed to feel the shift, their games ceasing as they stared at the strange woman who had appeared from nowhere. "That's not possible," my father finally managed, his voice hoarse. "We rented this property through the Dubois collection." "You did," I confirmed, moving further onto the deck, into the center of their circle. "They manage my rentals when I'm away on assignment." As it turned out, my trip was canceled. My mother sank back into her chair, her eyes wide. You own this house?" The question was a vessel, carrying a dozen others within it. "How could you possibly afford this? What have you become? How did this happen without our knowledge?" Before I could answer, a figure broke from the stunned group. My cousin Lena rushed forward, her face alight with a joy so pure it momentarily cracked my composure. "Anya, I knew it. I knew you'd come back." She threw her arms around my waist in a fierce hug. I hugged her back, surprised by the sudden tightness in my throat. This one, uncomplicated welcome was a lifeline in a sea of complexity. "Look at you," I murmured, holding her at arm's length. "You're all grown up." Her genuine warmth seemed to break the spell. The frozen tableau began to move. My Aunt Lena's mother gave me a tentative smile. My uncle offered an awkward wave. Nikolai approached, his handshake morphing into a stiff, uncertain hug. "You look incredible, Anya," he said, his voice thick with unspoken things. Sophia remained by her husband's side, her arm linked through his, her posture a fortress. "Well," I said, addressing the group at large, "I wouldn't want to interrupt your celebration. Please continue your lunch." "Join us," my aunt said immediately. "There's more than enough." I saw my mother flinch, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw at the invitation. I was an intruder at her meticulously planned event. For a fleeting second, I considered retreating, but I held my ground. This was my home. For once, they were the guests in my world. "Thank you," I said, taking the empty seat next to Lena. "I'd love to." The meal that followed was a masterclass in strained civility. The conversation was a carefully navigated minefield of neutral topics: the beauty of the coastline, the pleasant weather, the quality of the catering. No one looked directly at me for more than a few seconds, except Lena, who launched into a stream of questions about my work. "So you're really a photographer?" she asked, her eyes shining. "I am," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My company, Aperture Arts, specializes in architectural and interior photography." "Architectural photography," my father repeated, the first words he had spoken directly to me. His tone was skeptical. "And that's a lucrative profession?" The implication hung in the air. A hobby couldn't possibly pay for this. "It can be," I replied, meeting his gaze. "We have a strong client base. Boutique hotels, architects, developers." I paused, then added a detail I knew he would understand. "But this particular house was not something I purchased. It was bequeathed to me by a mentor who valued my work." My mother's lips thinned. "How very fortunate for you. Yes, I agreed, my eyes holding hers. It was. As the afternoon wore on, an uneasy truce settled over the family. I gave them a brief tour, indicating the areas that were private, my studio, my office, my bedroom, and making it clear the rest of the house was theirs to enjoy for the remainder of their stay. I answered their polite, surface-level questions about my life, volunteering nothing more. I was a gracious host, professional and impenetrably poised. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink, I found myself alone on the deck. I heard the sliding door open behind me. It was my father. "That work you did on the new waterfront development in the city," he said, his voice startlingly close. "The marketing images. That was yours." I turned, surprised. "Yes." He nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Impressive. Your use of light is masterful." The compliment seemed to cost him a great deal. Before I could formulate a reply, he turned and walked back into the house, leaving me with the lingering echo of his words and a new, unfamiliar crack in the foundation of our estrangement. Later that night, long after the house had grown quiet, I found Nikolai in the kitchen, staring into a glass of whiskey. "Can't sleep?" I asked, my voice soft. He shook his head, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I sat. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two strangers who shared a childhood. He looked tired, the confident gleam of the successful lawyer dimmed by a deep-seated weariness. "They told everyone you had a breakdown," he said abruptly, his voice low. "After graduation. They said the pressure was too much for you, that you needed time away, in a special facility." The lie was so audacious, so complete, it took my breath away. A breakdown was a more palatable story than a rebellion. "When you didn't come back, cap in hand, they just stopped talking about you," he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It was made clear that your name was not to be mentioned. And you went along with it," I stated, my voice flat. He had the grace to look ashamed. "It was easier, Anya. Dad's world is absolute. You're either in it, or you're out. Sophia and I, we built our lives inside it. You were the only one who ever dared to leave." "It wasn't courage," I said quietly. "It was self-preservation." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." He took a long swallow of his drink. "This whole trip, it's a charade. Dad's firm has been hemorrhaging money for years. Bad investments, a changing market he refused to adapt to. They had to take out a second mortgage on the house. This anniversary party is all for show, to keep up appearances for the rest of the family." The image of my invincible father, the master of his universe, now struggling to maintain a facade, was disorienting. "There's more," Nikolai said, his voice dropping even lower. "His health. He has a heart condition. He collapsed a few weeks ago. He's refusing to slow down. He thinks showing any weakness will make the whole enterprise crumble." Just then, the kitchen door swung open. It was Sophia, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of tired annoyance. "Sharing all the family skeletons, are we?" She took the third chair, and for a moment, the three of us sat in silence, the Volkov children reunited in my kitchen after a decade of fractures and secrets. "Your life," she said, looking around my kitchen at the clean lines and subtle, expensive finishes. "It seems so uncluttered." There was a sharp edge of envy to her voice. "You answer to no one." "I answer to my clients, my employees, and my bank account," I replied evenly. "Freedom isn't free, but it's yours." She twisted the enormous diamond on her finger. "Victor is having an affair. Has been for years. Everyone knows, including Dad. But Victor's father is one of Dad's last major investors, so we all just play our parts." The confession was stark, stripped of all artifice. The perfect Volkov daughter with her perfect, hollow life. Before anyone could respond, my mother appeared in the doorway, her posture as erect as ever. "Still awake?" she asked, her voice light, but her eyes sharp, taking in the scene. Nikolai and Sophia stood almost in unison, their childhood deference to her authority kicking in automatically. They murmured their goodnights and slipped past her, leaving me alone with her for the first time. She didn't speak immediately. She walked to the counter and began to prepare a cup of tea, her movements precise and familiar. "You've built a remarkable life, Anya," she said, her back to me. "Completely on your own." "I have." "We thought we were protecting you," she said, turning around, a teacup in her hand. "The world is not kind to artists. We didn't want you to struggle. So you erased me instead." She flinched. "Your father's pride, it is a powerful, destructive force. And perhaps mine is too." She placed the teacup on the table in front of me. It was chamomile with a sliver of lemon, exactly how I used to take it. The fact that she remembered such a small detail after so much time felt like a tiny, seismic shift. "He is not well, Anya," she said, her voice dropping the pretense, revealing the raw fear beneath. "He is terrified of failing, and I am terrified of losing him." I looked at this woman who had always seemed like a marble statue of perfection, and for the first time, I saw the cracks. I saw a wife afraid for her husband, a woman clinging to the ruins of a life she thought was indestructible. In that moment, the anger I had carried for a decade didn't vanish, but it softened, making room for a complicated, unwelcome pang of sympathy. I didn't sleep that night. I wrapped a blanket around myself and went down to the beach, my beach, and waited for the dawn. The confrontation I had both craved and dreaded had come and gone, leaving not victory, but a vast, quiet emptiness. The anger had been a fuel for so long. Without it, I felt strangely adrift. As the first pale light began to bleed across the horizon, I saw a figure making its way down the winding path from the house. It was my father. He walked slowly, carefully, and lowered himself onto the sand a few feet away from me. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the waves roll in and retreat. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice raspy in the morning air. His eyes were fixed on the sea. "I was so certain you would fail, that you would come back, defeated, and we could fix it. Put you on the right path." "I almost did fail," I admitted, the memory of those first years still sharp. "But you didn't," he said. A note of grudging wonder had entered his voice. "You built something real. Something of value." He finally turned to look at me. I would have been so proud to tell my friends that my daughter was the artist behind the Du Bois commissions or the Fairmont rebranding. If only it had been a path you had chosen for me, I finished for him. He nodded, a small, pained movement. "The irony," he said with a humorless chuckle, "is that you are the only one of my children who is truly secure, truly independent. You are the one who has built a legacy that will last." This was it, I realized. This was the closest to an apology, to an admission of fault, I would ever get from Roman Volkov. It was not everything, but it was something. "I'm not coming back, I said softly. "Not to the way things were." "I know," he said. "That world doesn't really exist anymore anyway." He gestured vaguely toward the house. Perhaps we can build something new." As he spoke, my cousin Lena appeared on the beach, her own small camera in hand, her face rapt with concentration as she framed a shot of the light on the water. "She has your eye," my father murmured, watching her. "Her parents want her to study finance." He glanced at me, a question in his eyes. "What do you think she should do?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, watching his niece, who so resembled the daughter he had lost. "I think," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his own history, "that I have seen the cost of crushing a dream. And I have seen the rewards of letting one fly." The rest of the reunion passed in a blur of cautious, new beginnings. On the final morning, as they packed their cars, the goodbyes were a study in this new, fragile dynamic. Nikolai hugged me tightly. "I'll call," he said. "For real, this time." Sophia offered a tentative smile. "Thank you for everything." My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes conveying a message her words could not yet form. My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, awkward embrace. "Take care of yourself, Anya." Lena was the last to leave. I had spent an hour with her the day before, showing her the basics of my studio equipment. "I'm going to practice every day," she promised, her eyes shining. "I'll make you proud." "Just make yourself proud," I told her, and in that moment, I felt the circle of mentorship complete. After the last car disappeared down the winding drive, I walked back into my silent, empty house. It felt larger now, filled with the echoes of what had transpired. I did not feel triumphant, nor did I feel wholly reconciled. I felt a quiet sense of peace. The ghosts had become people again, flawed, struggling people whose power over me had finally dissolved. 6 months later, I hosted Thanksgiving at the Sea Glass House. I invited my family. I also invited my chosen family, my friends, my team, Marcus and Genevieve's son, who had, over time, become a dear friend. Not everyone came. Sophia had other plans, but Nikolai came with his family. And my parents came. I watched my father, looking friendlier but more relaxed than I had ever seen him, talking quietly with one of my oldest friends. I watched my mother show Lena how to adjust the settings on her new camera, a gift from me. I saw them not as the titans who had forged and then rejected me, but simply as people, finding their way in a new landscape. Later that evening, when the house was quiet again, I stood on my deck, looking out at the dark, churning sea. The journey from the girl with $500 in her pocket to the woman standing here had been long and often lonely. But it had been mine. I had learned that true family isn't about unconditional agreement, but about unconditional respect for one another's truths. I had learned that the strongest boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but gates that allow you to let them in on your own terms. I hadn't forgiven everything, but I had moved beyond the need for apologies. I had found something far more valuable, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth, a foundation I had built myself, stone by painful stone. And that was a home no one could ever take from me.